Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my speculation going into Avatar The Last Airbender Imbalance Part 3. The final part of Imbalance is going to be out October 1st, 2019. It suffered a couple of delays and that over the last couple of weeks, but that is the date, and I don't really think it will change again. But yeah, final part of Imbalance. We're ending this series, and then hopefully we can move on to something different. I hope more Azula focused. Go back to some of the Fire Nation plots that are still out there, and then this can leave our other characters off in an interesting position as well. So we have the cover, we have the description, and I like to do these previews before we get too much information. So I think we can piece some stuff together from all this stuff. So the description reads, Team Avatar faces their most dangerous foe yet as the Bender versus non-Bender conflict turns into an all-out war in this action-packed conclusion to the Imbalance arc. While Aang grapples with a life-changing decision that only he can make as the Avatar, Toph and Katara implore him from opposite sides to choose a path. Meanwhile, Rue and Yao Ling concoct a fiery ploy to get their mother back. The Bender versus non-Bender conflict finally reaches a powerful boiling point, and for better or for worse, Cranefish Town will never be the same. So, part 2, now that we have it, gives us better context for what this life-changing decision is, and what, I suppose, Toph and Katara are going to be arguing for a decision for Aang to make. We know that Toph proposed the idea that with Li Ling captured, our villain for Imbalance captured, Aang should take her bending away to stop this. In Toph's opinion, that would set an example and would stop her supporters by showing that power again. Aang is left shocked by this. I think the rest of the group are left shocked that Toph would suggest this, in that, you know, obviously everyone had a bit of a very shocked reaction when Aang even said he did this to Ozai, just the fact that he has the power to do this now. But they haven't brought it up, and I find it very interesting that here is the first time Aang is going to have to tackle a less obvious application of that technique. I don't think there's anyone who could argue against the fact that he did it to Ozai, but here it's a lot more up in the air. So Toph is going to be arguing for why Aang should take Li Ling's bending away and really utilize this ability, and Katara is going to be arguing the opposite, that Aang shouldn't take her bending away, and we'll hopefully see what the exact dynamic they go for there. And I think that's the thing that we have here, in that, like, okay, Toph is the one proposing this, I suppose, more negative kind of thing towards Aang, and Katara is maybe going to having the more positive side of things. But if it is a proper conflict, they're going to have to present it a little bit more evenly. They have to present a positive look on what Toph is suggesting, and perhaps a maybe negative or not fully thought out perspective from Katara. Now, ultimately, I do feel that in this situation, Aang can't just take her bending away. I think that would just amplify the situation beyond what it needs to be right now. And Li Ling is not the threat on the level of an Ozai, is not the threat on the level of a Yakone, because most of what Li Ling has accomplished here has nothing to do with her bending. Yes, she fought the team down in this cavern here, and she's a relatively powerful earthbender, but inherently, like, what she's doing is not as a result of her bending. Yes, you know, it is Bender versus non-Bender, and it would definitely make a statement if Aang was to take her bending away, but because that is the conflict, it would send the wrong statement. So I think right now I'm leaning towards the fact that I think Aang ultimately will make the decision to, in terms of taking her bending away, no. But like they tend to do here, they tend to split the difference here. And what I'm assuming they may do with this is that I think Aang will be like, no, I'm not taking Li Ling's bending away, but I want to make a statement about this. And he wants to, like, let people know, I have the ability to take bending away. And explain that, like, I took Ozai's bending away, in case you kind of make it public, in case you weren't aware of it. I took Ozai's bending away, that's why I defeated him. And just put it on the table at the very least, of, like, you know, Benders, you have this power, you know, you have a responsibility to use it effectively and properly. If you go out of line in a really extreme way like that, be aware that I will take your bending away. And just leave it on the table there that that power can and will be used as a punishment in extreme examples. But in this case, I don't think the situation goes far enough, and especially with bending being kind of important to the character in place here, and it not, but without it being like a factor. Like this would be very different if Li Ling was going around the place just earth bending factories apart by herself. She wasn't. Even her daughters, in the grand scheme of things, while they've almost hurt some people with their bending, with Liao Ling's bending, they haven't necessarily committed tons of crimes with their bending. And so I think that's the problem here of, from Toph's side of things. If she goes too far down that you have to do this, a bender committed a crime, they need to be punished for it, they have a power, that power needs to be taken away, that's going too far of just, you have to create a distinction. What level of crime deserves the punishment of you get your bending taken away? And in a way, who has the right to, I suppose, ask Aang to do that? Only Aang, he's the one who has the ability. And because he's the Avatar, he's not technically part of any specific, government system or anything like that. So the decision ultimately is up to him. And again, with Toph also not really being in that official of a position, okay, her father sort of runs the business council, but there's no established government process there. So there's no way to enforce Aang doing this, or even I think the main problem is there's no way to really enforce they're being held captive. Team Avatar basically is holding Li Ling captive, and I assume most people would agree with it that they found the evidence that she has done some crimes, but on whose authority is she going to be punished for it? Because the big problem with the business council is obviously that it's so focused on the business that they forgot everything else. It's just about the businesses. And I'm assuming at least some part of this is probably going to be changing the nature of how Cranefish Town is run to a degree of business is important, but there's a lot more going on here. How did it take Aang arriving here to even let them know that, yeah, you probably need a police force that is just generally, part of this town, rather than just each factory having their own guards. And I think we also saw in part 1 that they haven't even come up with any sort of a waste disposal system. As much as things are advancing and industry is kind of booming, the pollution because of that is just being thrown out onto the beaches. That's why the team had to clean up the beach. That's other stuff like that kind of has to be, I think, almost brought up onto the table as well. But getting back to Toph Katara, so Toph, I think, is personally involved in this. So she is in a way a little bit of revenge here. They did this to my father's factory. They deserve to be punished for it. You did this to Ozai, you have to do it to her. I'm assuming she'll make a more logical point to Aang, because I suppose right now, without that, it would seem why would Aang ever side with that decision, given how at least his shock reaction would lead you to believe. And then if Katara makes in any way of a convincing point for why bending is important and shouldn't be taken away, why would he not side with her, given that she's his girlfriend? Not to say that Aang would just side with Katara just because of that, but, I don't think Katara is going to make a weak point. I think she is probably going to appeal more to the emotion of the situation here, in terms of her bending is so important to her because of, I suppose, the effect, what happened to her mother, and her mother's death basically allowing Katara to have her bending and kind of live freely as the last Southern Waterbender. And she may make points, especially with Toph, I think the obvious counterpoint is you technically have committed crimes using your bending. What if you got your bending taken away? That would have a much deeper effect on Toph than pretty much anyone else, because, her bending is how she sees. And so it's this sort of a power that, okay, you can look, differently at someone else, but Toph isn't perhaps thinking about the full ramifications of all of this. And I think that's something that Katara probably will bring up at some point. I suppose how exactly they go about like convincing Aang and the exact nature of the specific approach that they take is going to be interesting. But I think by the end of this, I'd be shocked. I'd be very, very shocked if Li Ling got her bending taken away, and that came to any sort of a solution here. Like I said, I feel ultimately it will be Aang saying, like, not in this specific situation, but I'll leave it on the table at least that I will do it, or something along those lines. Now, getting into the other thing here from the description, Ru and Yaling concoct a fiery ploy to get their mother back. So this is set up from part 2 as well. We see Yaling recovering from the chi blocking. Ru is there as well. They both decide that they're going to do something to get their mother out. The cover makes it clear that this fiery ploy is obviously that they set parts of the town on fire. Now, whether that is just they set the factories on fire, or they actually full on set anywhere on fire to create a distraction to get their mother out, I'm not really sure. But either way, I assume Li Ling probably will escape, and it will lead to another kind of fight, confrontation, but it will be much more open. The previous fight was in the underneath, in the kind of cavern. It was, the couple of benders there versus Team Avatar. This is going to be public. This is going to be out there. The benders are going to be there. I assume most of the business owners will be there, and it will be a fight in the streets with all this fire around. And it's going to, I think, lead to some pretty big things. I think Ru is actually going to be very important in part 3, because the amount of setup moments from part 2, of moments of her having a mixed reaction to things her sister says, to things her mother says, because she's a non-bender, and the two of them basically talk down to her. They talk about how we're doing this for our family, but that they hate non-benders, basically. And that they say benders are better than non-benders, and it's like they don't see that Ru is also a non-bender. Characters like Sokka have pointed this out to her. She's seen her sister be incredibly rude to her with things like, oh, what if this chi blocking doesn't wear off? Then I'll be just like you. And it's just that, like, overly aggressive, needless kind of approach, and that, like, to some degree that is making it clear that they do think of her differently because she is a non-bender. And I think what's going to happen is that Ru is going along with this to get her mother out and just go along with things, get things back to the way they were, that I suppose potentially if she can mastermind a plan to get her mother out, that will prove that she's just as good in a way, even though she's a non-bender. But I think when you get down to it, I think either Li Ling or Yaling or both of them are going to be on the verge of doing something, and I think Ru will turn, or at the very least will step in the way of whatever they're doing to try and stop them. I think she is going to have a very emotional outburst in terms of, if this is the way you feel, does that apply to me? Do you think I'm worth less than my sister because I'm a non-bender? Things like that, I think she probably will have to bring out. And they could do that in a very big moment of maybe Li Ling and Yaling get the advantage, and maybe the benders who are causing all this trouble get the advantage and are going to, hurt someone like a Sokka or a Suki, and Ru steps in the way. That could be a huge moment, and especially if it's at this moment where maybe Ru is the one to sort of bring up something like, maybe she knows more the specific reason behind why her mother's doing all of this. Maybe there is something that happened to the father. That would be a great moment to bring it up and sort of end things in a more kind of character development, personal way of them realizing that, like, I'm assuming borderline at this point that it has to be some sort of a thing where the father was a non-bender, and something happened there, or he was a bender and non-benders did something to him. But that Ru saying something, Ru standing out, will be the kind of turning point. And I feel that in a way, maybe they'll do something like Li Ling is against whatever Ru is doing, but Yaling kind of sides with her sister over her mother. And it's difficult because I also feel they're in this odd situation with the villains, and it happens a lot in a way like this, where I ultimately think we're going to be resolving Li Ling. I don't think Li Ling is going to be a villain who continues for multiple books going forward. Part 3, I think, will be the end of her as a villain. Now, they could go the Gilak way, where whatever happens, she gets killed off, and she's just some, crazy lunatic. I don't think they'll do that, because I think they want to continue with Li Ling, with Yaling and Rue as at least minor characters in the background with kind of some stuff going on. So I don't think you can kill off Li Ling. So I think you have to come up with a character reason, give her personal reason to why she was doing this in the first place, despite being in such a relatively stable position as being one of the most well-off kind of business owners, but she still wants to try and do all of this and be so anti-non-bender. Rue bringing that up would absolutely, bring that to the, forefront. And if Li Ling ends up actually, suffering some sort of punishment for that, it gives Rue potentially the path to maybe step in as the new leader of the business, because she seems to be more on the kind of smart, able to do some good dealing side of things. Maybe she's a bit too young to immediately do that, but something along those lines. And then Yaling, I think they will come back to the connection with Toph. I think there will be, another fight between the two of them at some point, but I ultimately think by the end of this, there will be a respect between the two of them. That as much as, Yaling is saying that, oh, I'm the best bender, I'm better than you, and Toph is kind of saying, you're a terrible bender. I think Toph realizes Yaling's better than, a lot of other benders out there. And if they are going to, in some way in this book, begin to properly transition Toph into more of the chief of police Toph, I think Yaling, kind of joining her in a way on that and becoming a, police officer type character makes a whole lot of sense, because I assume they're going to do something along the lines of the Metal Bending Academy is going to be very connected to the kind of police force establishment in Cranefish Town. We know Yaling wants to learn metal bending, and I think, despite the scene that we saw, I think they will have Yaling learn metal bending. So it would make sense that the two of them could become, police officers or something like that. And that gives a kind of path for, in a way, like all of the different characters to have something going on. Where Rue should come out of this, I think, in a very good way if they commit to a big emotional scene for her. Yaling, if she does maybe side with her sister or whatever happens, could come out of this in a way where, like, in an effort to redeem herself, she, like Toph goes down the kind of police route. That seems great. Again, with Li Ling, it's up in the air. I think it very much depends on, are they giving her an emotional, character-driven reason, motivation behind what she's doing, or is this just pure hatred? Is this Gilak 2.0 basically, and we just need to get rid of her? They're obviously the two kind of big things going on. As for the, I suppose, main theme of the book, Bender versus non-Bender, like I said before, I think this book is getting a little bit distracted, and I think it's almost two issues that we're dealing with here. While yes, the stuff that's going on with Li Ling is dealing with the Bender versus non-Bender conflict, but because of what she's doing and like her being the main villain and amplifying it, the focus has very much been on taking out her and not really dealing with the core issues, because all she's doing is basically making things worse. And we're so focused on stopping the person that's making things worse that we're not really tackling deep down what's causing the issues between benders and non-benders. And ultimately, what this book has been saying is that it comes down to the factories bringing in machinery and that leading to benders losing their jobs. And the book wasn't overly, descriptive about, specifics going on here. Were benders offered roles or training on the machinery? Did they refuse that out of pride or something like that? We're not entirely sure. An immediate point I would make is that they've had a few scenes now with Satoru basically being like, oh, I've caused this, haven't I? Me wanting to make new cool machines has ended up with people losing their jobs. Is this a problem? And Toph has been the one to always say to him, like, no, it's not your problem. The problem was too big anyway. I think the one thing I'd say to that would be that, why don't you make machines that help benders? They'd be different machines, and maybe you don't need to go as far with them because the benders can do things that non-benders can't. So they're these kind of, machines that are only going to take, half to maybe 2/3 of the work to make to do, because the benders can supply the rest of it. And you make these machines that make bending more effective. That way, like, you're not spending as much developing the machines, but then you could make up for that by hiring benders again. Something along those lines, because ultimately, I suppose what we get to is a point where benders do have these roles in the city. Like, the example one that we have is Mako working the generator plant, the power plant, using lightning bending on the machine to generate electricity. That's something only a bender can do. So, machines along that line, I think, could help things. But that almost seems so specific, getting into the weeds of the machinery and all that sort of stuff. So what are they going to do? And in a way, borderline, you'd have to say, is leaving things the way they are. Once they deal with Li Ling, leaving the conflict the way it was prior to Li Ling amplifying things, is that not basically the situation we have in Korra? Obviously the whole machine-specific focus stuff on that is different, but you have, like, gangs of benders causing havoc in the city. That's exactly like Korra. They just get more organized and are triads now. And the difference is obviously that we have, like, pro-bending becomes an important part of the city. And then factories get even bigger and so on. So the metal bending police force, of course. So what actually changes? I think ultimately the solution just has to be, are more jobs made anywhere for the benders, or are all those benders just going to jail for doing this stuff, and that gets them out of the picture? I think that there's a solution that needs to come into play here with this whole factories, over-reliance on machines, and so on. Now, maybe it is different machines, maybe it is just, I suppose, different factories doing different things. Maybe they're all actually doing the same thing, and that's not helping anything. Maybe it is something as simple as, like, we actually need to work on all these other sections of the town, not just the business stuff. We can use benders in all of these other areas, like Team Avatar on the beach, cleaning out the waste. There's something benders can do, if there's lots of metal and all that sort of stuff going along. We saw how effectively, the likes of Toph, Katara, Aang were at clearing out the mess. That's somewhere where you can, put some benders, at least for a while, to do something, as, you maybe make a proper, like, sewage system or whatever you need to do to resolve the issues of, how quickly things are advancing. I suppose construction for earthbenders is one thing. We saw kind of the non-benders sort of refusing that when, like, Aang and Toph offered to rebuild that woman's house. There's stuff like that where, like, the book has kind of been making it out like, okay, the benders are the villains because they lost their jobs and are now angry about it. When, like, the non-benders is kind of like, okay, this happened, but did you do anything to try and, help the benders, or were you a little bit too, happy or just, fine with the situation of, like, oh yeah, it has to be this way, because you were asking for too much money or whatever. That's where I think it's kind of unclear about if we'll even get any sort of solution to that in some way. I think they just have to say something that at least calms down the situation from borderline war to nothing. Like I said, I think ultimately some sort of big confrontation with, like, within the Li Ling's family will probably stop the war from happening. Team Avatar will be in there. I suppose, like, Aang will still be trying to make the decision to take Li Ling's bending away or not, as Ru and Yaoling are there with Li Ling. it's gonna reach I suppose a pretty big moment, but obviously they can't make this too crazy, otherwise it's kind of like, how did we ever get back to any sort of, peace in any way? So, there is only so far they can go in terms of like, if the whole place burns down, it's just like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So they have to stop it before it just gets crazy. As for other stuff going on here, I suppose the real question is, I suppose, by the end of the book, where do they leave most of the main characters in terms of setting up stuff to come and what's next, basically? We don't know what comic is next. We don't know what creative team is going to be on the next Avatar comic. They haven't confirmed there's another one, but they also haven't confirmed they're stopping. So we're just in that situation right now where we're just kind of waiting for them to announce that there is another comic. I think there pretty much has to be, just because there's so much left open. And I think with this one, it's an interesting one in that I think borderline, the main thing they need to do here is make some long-term writing decisions about where the main characters, are by the end of the book. In that, I don't think you can just have Sokka in the aftermath of this just be like, oh yeah, I'm staying with, Katara and Aang, and like, it's just going to be the team as it was. I think, you have to do stuff like Toph leave to go back to her school, maybe do something like, oh, I have to learn the exact training to be a police officer now that I know that's something I like. Suki needs an explanation. I think that absolutely is something they have to address, in that I'd be very annoyed if it's just a situation by the end of this, Suki's like, sorry guys, I have to go back to be Zuko's bodyguard, you know how it is, it was nice seeing you all again, and Suki's just gone again. To me, I think you need to move Suki away from that. I think you need to give her more time around Sokka, around the team, depending on what way you're keeping the team. But borderline, I'd be like, I think the decision that they need to make is Sokka and Suki go off on their own. That allows Sokka to have his development. It allows Suki to have some focus of her own. Because I think Aang is going to have to stay in or around Cranefish Town while all this is happening. Because we also need to set up Air Temple Island. Aang and Katara have already had a scene on it. They haven't called it that yet. Aang hasn't made any move to claim it or anything like that. But I think in the aftermath of this, he's going to realize that he needs a base of operations around this town where everything seems to be kicking off, and kicking off very quickly. He's probably going to realize that he probably should have seen this coming from the rift, and he now has to be like, I have to be here, and I can't just be traveling for like months, years at a time and come back to these places and this amount of stuff has happened. So I think Aang is going to need to kind of settle himself there in or around Cranefish Town, and I think you kind of need to be like, live on Air Temple Island. And that's when I suppose maybe you might make the decision of Aang asking Katara, are you going to stay with me here? And you kind of have that, are they going to live together now? So I that's what I think they need to do. I think it's getting a little bit too samey at times, just in terms of like the group dynamics. Like I said with Sokka, you need to start that development of him into a leader. Like, I get they're still very young characters here, like not a ton of time has passed over the course of the comics, but you have to start that development at some point. Like, you're already doing super long-term storytelling for the like world building aspects of like Cranefish Town becomes Republic City. When are you going to start that for some of the other characters? Like, it's great that like Toph is borderline chief of police Toph here, but like you have to start mention stuff like, where does she actually get police training, or does she get any training? When does she officially gain the title of like chief of police? Sokka's going to be in a leadership position, but like, where is he gaining this leadership experience? And that's why I'd be like, Sokka has to go off on his own or with Suki, and I think he maybe has to go back to the south and assist with the stuff going on there as the Southern Water Tribe is getting more involved in the kind of world picture. I suppose getting involved in Cranefish Town type stuff as it's developing into Republic City, and I think Sokka should take a kind of lead role on that. It would allow Suki to be around him more, and develop herself, and so on. That's what you need to do. So, like, my preference in a way would be that you, at the end of this book, kind of split up Team Avatar for a little bit. Like, you've done bits and pieces of it already, in that, like, Zuko is borderline on a break from Team Avatar just because of his position as the Fire Lord. Toph at times has also been on a break from Team Avatar because she has her metal bending school. But Aang, Katara, Sokka have been just linked together as like Team Avatar. I think you kind of have to split Sokka away from that to allow him to get the development that he needs. And I think it in a way would allow Katara and Aang, their relationship, to develop in a more interesting way, and have Aang kind of stand out more as a world leader in a way himself. So that's the sort of stuff I want to see them do towards the end of this book, because I think you have to go for the Azula story next, and ultimately that story doesn't need to involve every single member of Team Avatar. I think somewhere along the way probably Aang and I think Katara need to be involved, but I don't think you need Toph to be involved in it necessarily. I don't think you need Sokka there. I don't think you need Suki necessarily. The characters that Azula needs for her story to happen are obviously herself, her mother, Ursa. I think you need Zuko. I think they're going to involve Ki in it. Maybe Norin, maybe. But also Mei and Ty Lee as like her best friends, because that is an important aspect of that. And I think from the search, Aang will also want to help Azula. And because Katara was the one who like defeated her, I think Katara would also be wanting to help as well. Iroh, of course, will be involved in Fire Nation stuff, so he's there if you need him. Ozai is also there in prison if you need to involve him in that story. But I think fundamentally it is a story that doesn't need to involve Team Avatar the entire step of the way. So you can, I think, end this book by moving the characters around a bit without it feeling like you're going off in some crazy direction. Because once you start the Azula arc and you really start it going and commit to changing her as a character, you can have potentially multiple series focus on it. Or if you want to make it more of a long-term thing, you can have it gradually happen as the arc has been so far. But then when you come back around to the other characters, you can have more like side plot type stuff going on. Like, here's Aang and Katara on their own doing something here, and then here's a side plot with Sokka and Suki doing something here, while we catch up with Toph as she's, training people and learning to be a police officer. That sort of stuff. So, I think that's most of what I want to talk about here. I think I covered pretty much everything. Yeah, the Aang, Toph, Katara dynamic is covered. The whole taking bending away aspect. I talked about the villain plot with Li Ling, Ru, and Yao Ling. The thematic plot of Bender versus non-Bender. Plus just how they end the characters off here. Because obviously, like, the ending of North and South was more of an ending for the creative team, so they just kind of had all the characters together, happy ending. Here, I'd like it to be more of a setup for more stuff to come. So, yeah, I think that's most of what I want to talk about in this video, at least right now, when we don't have tons of information. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on a lot of these kind of interesting dynamics going on heading into part 3. What way do you think they'll go about ending things in terms of, I suppose, the dynamic between Li Ling, Ru, and Yao Ling? How they'll do the Aang, Toph, and Katara dynamic over the taking bending away ability, and just in general, like, what will they do in terms of resolving what's going on here in Cranefish Town? And I think most importantly, where do you think they'll leave the characters off with regards to setup for future books? But yeah, that's been the video. Leave some comments about what you think in the comment section below, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.